Hold on, let me make sure it's gonna go faster.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and David talk about two films that one may be better, one may be worse. Sometimes they're both pretty good, and sometimes they're both terrible. I'm your host, Dean, joined by the other D and D in this decalogue of films, David. How you doing? And also, what does decalogue mean?
Good question. I'm trying not to think about exhausting things right now. It's been an exhausting mental week for I think everybody,
For everyone
out there. But I am thankful that we get to sit down this week with these two films, which are, I think we rightly labeled them comfort films.
Yeah, because, we've had a pretty trying couple of days here in the good old US of A.
Or around the world, I'm sure people have been kind of,
Everybody's been having a stressful week.
noticing what's going on.
Yeah, so, and I think the best thing to do after a really stressful time is to sit down and watch a movie that kind of lightens the mood. Because that's been the theme this whole month is we talk about, politics, politics where it's taken seriously, politics where it's kind of being poking fun of.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just need a film where it's like, I need to escape from the reality of the dumpster fire I live in and watch something fun, which is what we have here.
Yeah. What we have here is a couple of fantasy films in the form of The Princess Bride
And the other film.
Yeah, the other film of this pairing, which will be Willow, but Dean and I certainly are foreshadowing a little bit when we say that.
Yeah, and you know how these things usually go, because on more than one occasion we've started thinking one film is better, and after some pretty deep conversation we kind of flip at the end. I don't think that's going to happen this week.
No, I think it's going to be cut and dry. We know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, but both these films do have merits, and both of them kind of deserve to be a little talking about. And
some more than others.
Some more than others. Yes. Yeah. And but before we get any further, David, let's do your thing. You're the writer. Give us the log lines. Tell us what these movies are about. Give us the short and sweet.
Right. So the log lines for these movies this week. For Willow, a wannabe wizard dwarf travels across the wastes to return the prodigal princess to her kingdom. And for The Princess Bride, a lowly farmer saves his true love from marrying a politically corrupt prince.
We have some Game of Thrones. We have some Lord of the Rings. Sounding good.
Yeah, it's funny you say the Game of Thrones thing. You pointed that out earlier, and that was also something I didn't even really notice until we started talking about it. And maybe should we save the best for last, or do you want to dig right into it?
Okay. I think we should probably talk about Willow first before we talk about Princess Bride. For the sole reason of I think I know we have a lot more to talk about with Princess Bride, but Willow deserves to be talked about. I don't know if I'm the only person who enjoyed Willow as a kid, but I might have been the only kid who enjoyed Willow as a kid, because everyone else I talk about says they hated that movie.
Dean, you very well might be. Listen.
Monsters.
So this was actually my first time watching Willow, and I'm glad it was, because it's a charming movie. Certainly, I like Val Kilmer. I like Warwick Davis. He's great.
Yeah.
I was interested. I know this was a Ron Howard movie as well. I've been thinking I should probably watch more of like director films, of famous directors, and kind of learn a little bit more about style and those kinds of things. But what's interesting to me upon first thinking about this film is this feels a lot like Ron Howard was trying to be Steven Spielberg in some way, even though I know that chronologically that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean because what is it? So I know Steven Spielberg's big, like his first hit was Jaws, right? And then I think after
Yeah.
that it was like, was it Close Encounters of the Third Kind and then E.T.?
Well, let's see here. I'll look up his filmography real quick so that we can get a handle on it. But yeah, I think Jaws could probably be, if not his first feature, be credited as his first,
That was his business card when he jumped onto the scene, being like, "Hey guys, I'm Steven Spielberg. I made this."
He had plenty to do in TV directing for many years throughout the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, I think the Sugarland Express is actually credited as his first like feature film.
Well, I just want to know when did he make E.T.? Was that 81?
Yeah, so E.T. was 82.
Okay.
Raiders of the Lost Ark was 81, which
we've done before.
covered in our very first episode. But yeah, it was Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1941, which nobody remembers, Raiders of the Lost Ark,
which everyone remembers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we've started this series with two of what are now known as the greatest blockbusters
of all time.
Ever. Then it was E.T. Then he did Temple of Doom, and then it started to kind of devolve from there.
But the reason I bring it up is because I think you make a good point. Because this feels like a movie Steven Spielberg would have made, but at the point in his career when Willow was made, he hadn't made E.T. yet, which basically solidified him as the family director, right? The heart movies, because that's like what he basically makes now, is movies about like, oh, the family, heart, whimsy and shit like that.
Yeah, I pulled up his filmography earlier, and I know that either it was just before this or just after this that he did Backdraft, which is the film I always attribute to Ron Howard when I think about him. He's like especially because there was that Universal backlot attraction in which, he's sitting there, and then that was the first time I learned that Ron Howard was a ginger.
Made you feel good, right? Ron Howard has no soul. That's why he makes the movies.
Yeah, that's why he's in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually it was Willow. Just before this, he had done Cocoon and Gung Ho, which,
okay.
I don't know what that's all about. And then Parenthood, which is a classic comedy. And Backdraft then came right after that in 91.
So
a Kurt Russell movie, by the way, so we're going to have to do that eventually.
I do like me some Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
But yeah, so because this movie feels like it's a very apparent kids movie, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say so.
But there's some stuff in there that is just a little weird, right? So I'll just do my little spiel on Willow real quick and just tell me when I'm going off the rails a little bit. So I watched this movie, and first of all, I was like, okay, the story's pretty basic. It's kind of like a hero's journey going on. And then it was like, oh, it's like this kind of like average kids movie. And then I started realizing that there's a bunch of effects in there. There's a bunch of money behind this. Apparently George Lucas was the writer and like did the producing, and ILM did a bunch of the effects. And it got to the point where it looked like Willow, like it looked like this movie had a bunch of money and it was punching above its weight class like every scene. Like all these scenes that were supposed to be like kind of like quiet whimsy kind of thing, it was like, oh, it's a nice fantasy land, and it just like punched way above its weight class. The best one is that I can think of is the fight scene where it's like the giant 3-headed monster. No, it's the 2-headed monster in the castle, where it's all the fires going on and there's a bunch of extras and suits of armor.
Yeah,
this
and
giant
the claymation dragon, nonetheless, that I was particularly like. I know this was like 1988, correct?
No, I think this was 1980.
Yeah, because
no,
yeah.
No, it was 88.
So 88.
Okay,
That's
was
obviously before computer graphics. Like that wasn't really solidified until Jurassic Park. Um,
Yeah.
I get that they weren't going to be able to do something that looked like crazy good, but I was also kind of fascinated by the fact that they would try, because I can't think of a fantasy film before this that really does like large scale monster in it. Like, yeah,
Oh, Ray Harryhausen, King Kong,
right, and those movies
Godzilla.
use claymation in that way, but like the way they did it in this felt like just off. It was either supposed to be CGI, and it was just too early for them to actually do anything about that, or like the claymation should have been a little bit more noticeable. It's like there's this weird uncanny valley going on with it to go on this, continuing. What would you call it? An issue on this podcast is the uncanny valley of special effects.
Yeah, like it all. Okay, so we talked about Time Bandits before, for a Terry Gilliam episode, and we spent like 10 minutes talking about the giant effect
Right.
in that film, where it's the giant. He's wearing the ship on his head, and he's walking out of the water. And we talked so long about it, it just looked real. It looked good. You can tell it was just some forced perspective, but you bought right into it. This movie, it's like I want to buy into it because I'm a fantasy nerd, and I'm trying to drink the Kool-Aid, but there's little things like that just kind of pull me out of it. That, and it's the brownies.
Oh my god, the French fairies. Yeah.
Oh, you had an issue with those ones?
It's another, these movies always make they have to have the comic relief somewhere. I get it. And it's just odd to me that they had to add these, like, I think this is actually a good segue into one of my biggest problems with the film, and kind of what you were mentioning earlier, where it's like, it feels like the plot is a little slapdashed.
Yeah.
Not to already get into comparisons, but The Princess Bride, we all know, has one of the greatest stories ever told. Period. Yeah.
Period.
And
Full stop. Citizen Kane, take a
we'll
step
talk
back.
about it later, but it does that because Goldwyn is a master of finding meaning in action. And of course, he's aided by parody in that, but this doesn't have parody. This is supposed to be, the classic fantasy hero's journey. And
it's completely sincere.
Yeah, and I think it's almost sincere to a fault, where some of the antics the characters get into, even though that there's moments where they poke fun at it, such as when Willow is trying to cast his spell, and I can't remember the stupid sugar squirrel or whatever it is name, that at that point had turned into a crow, I believe. Val Kilmer makes like a joke where it's like, after the sorceress mentions that she'll turn into a beautiful girl, he's like, "Concentrate, Willow." And I'm like, okay, Mad Mardigan's a horn dog, and that's all I really got out of that. Whereas like the humor and things like The Princess Bride uses parody to its advantage, and even still is much more clever than just like, the most obvious joke on the page. And right after this too, there's the scene where it's like they make the escape from the base camp in the Himalayas or wherever they are, and they sled down, which is kind of a classic, getaway trope. You make your snow sled getaway, and then Kilmer turns into a stupid fucking snowball. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's just like, for me at times, I wanted to take it seriously, and I even will say something toward the end of the movie actually was very clever, but everything else is just kind of like obvious.
You had some pretty distinct issues with like the story and how the story set up and paid off.
Set up and payoff is an interesting way to put it, because like, think about the army too. That like, when they first meet Mad Mardigan and he's in this,
birdcage thing.
over the Valley of 1,000 Deaths or whatever that he's supposed to be. The army passes that has I don't know what the warrior's name is, but it's like his enemy friend from a past war, and that is really only done so that they can come into battle at the end of the movie. Like, there's not really a whole other reason why the army would be there, other than some like very basic foreshadowing. It's coincidental to a fault.
Yeah. Well, so I did tell you. I mentioned earlier George Lucas wrote this script, right?
Oh,
and it's very
that makes
hero's
a lot
journey
of sense.
kind of thing.
I did not know that.
Right?
Okay.
So, yeah. So, like, I know you're saying it's like, issue with setup, payoff, all this other stuff. So, I think I'm not gonna break anyone's hearts when I tell people that George Lucas is not a very good writer. Am I gonna break anyone's heart with that? Huh. You don't say. So people keep going back to like, well, he wrote Star Wars, he wrote American Graffiti, Star Wars is one of the greatest film of all time, yada yada yada. But what people kind of forget is that George Lucas wrote the basic, like, he wrote the plot to Star Wars, the basic stuff of Star Wars, but he basically did all of that movie by committee. He only directed the first Star Wars, and most of the writing, he went over to people like, hey, this is the script I have, do you have any notes? And he basically just absorbed notes from everyone around him.
And that's common. It's just that I think then that those notes end up really making that movie. And it's funny that you say it like that too, because like Star Wars is actually much the opposite of this, where the plot isn't coincidental. There's purpose the entire time. Like you might be able to say that that the hero's journey is always coincidental to a fault, and that why would Luke Skywalker happen to be the perfect guy? But that's kind of the point of the hero's journey, is that you're supposed to be writing about a character who's perfect for the journey, which is another interesting thing that I think about when I compare those two movies, because really when you think about it, Luke has zero character development brought up that makes him the perfect pilot to go out and destroy the Death Star, whereas Warwick Davis' character Willow in this movie, it's actually his character set up really well in the whole wizard thing, where he's like a common street performer performing magic tricks, and he wants to become like the next wizard of his town, and like that's actually a really good setup that's then forgotten about until the very end of the movie. Like, I think that's really what bugs me, is that the character never shows up in a lot of the plot.
Yeah, it feels like Willow is a character we're only following just so we can go to like the next set piece. This movie feels like we're going from set piece to set piece, and the plot only exists so George Lucas can like flex
or
his
even
effects
like
crew,
so that Val Kilmer can just kind of become the de facto star, which is, it's sad because it's like I really think that so many of the plot points that end up happening in the movie could be solved by Warwick Davis like going through this character development of like, okay, because obviously let's reveal the end as it is. The end is good because he finally gets to use his street magic to become the perfect wizard, right? And that's really good character development, is that you end up the ending is in the beginning, and you use the entirety of your character after him learning what he needs to complete himself to solve the ending.
And he's fighting the big bad evil like queen witch person, and he's able to outsmart her. He can't like beat her in a game of like one-on-one combat, but he can outsmart her, and it's like, oh, Willow's been shown to be clever this whole time, and it's a payoff for the character.
Then it's like that's the only time really Willow gets to do that, because okay, maybe in like then to preparing for the battle, he finally gets to do something that again calls back to his village life, where he mentions that the moles would tunnel under the garden or whatever, and that's how they're going to get into the castle. But like, okay, he goes to okay, here's something, because maybe I completely missed it. When he leaves like the rest of the party at the beginning of the dwarves who are traveling to return the child. I didn't even catch that. Why does he separate from them?
At the very beginning. Wait,
No,
after
it's
they meet
before they
Mad
meet Mad
Mardigan?
Mardigan. It's yeah.
Is
So
it
they're
before they
in the
meet Mad
party
Mardigan?
with like the wizard and that one dwarf that's always clowning on him, and they separate from each other. Willow and Migosh, I think his name is, to go a different way, or like they stay someplace when they finally see Mad Mardigan, and I,
Oh, okay. I think I remember. But
yeah,
first, can I ask you a favor? Can you turn your camera off and then back on,
yeah,
because you're frozen on my
I don't
screen?
know
You've
why
been for
I'm
like
not.
20 minutes.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. It works perfect now. But yeah, where was I? Yeah. So yeah, no, I remember. So what it happens is it's like the scene where they meet Matt and Mardigan, and they're like, oh, we're gonna give the baby over to a human, because that's like the whole reason they're going out. And then Willow's like, I can't leave, the baby with this person because he's a scumbag, and everybody else is like, this is job accomplished,
Oh, so
deuces,
they
and
go
they
back
all
to the
bail.
village.
And
Okay.
Willow wants to make Willow wants to make
Right.
sure the baby's okay, kind of like. It's the whole thing where he's just like, oh, I'm good natured person, I'm gonna make sure the baby's okay. And they're just like, hey, our job was just to leave it with a human, which, by the way, is a very strange plan.
I
Just
kind of
leave with
get it
any old
because maybe
human.
that then sets up like the heart of the character. This is another interesting thing, not to continually elbow Princess Bride back into this conversation, but this is another thing that movie really pointed out to me, is that plot works best for maybe at least these movies when you start with the simplest conflict and then work your way up. I think some movies
Yeah.
can blow their load too early, or even that's like a conflict can seem a little bit too complicated, and then a lull in the movie forms because the conflict gets a little too simple before the climax.
I mean, okay. Another example is was it? What's the second of the new Star Wars trilogy?
Last Jedi. Yeah.
Last Jedi. So in Last Jedi, we have the thing where they set up the conflict. Oh, the ship's basically just dragging on or whatever, and we need to find a way to escape the Empire as
It
they're
is
chasing
exactly like
chasing
that.
after us.
You're right,
And
yeah.
then it cuts to them playing around in a casino and all this other plot stuff for like 40 minutes before we get back to the main reason the movie started. And like, I don't think Willow has that sin.
It does a little bit,
All right,
because I think that
'cause-
it suffers from. Okay, like I kept track of it while I was watching that sequence when they're like sitting there with Mad Mardigan. There's like 3 separate scenes, quote unquote, that happen, but they're still in the same location, and it's not as big of a sin as Last Jedi. You're right, because that happens over the course of like 45 minutes to an hour in that movie. This only happens over the course of like 15, maybe 20-ish minutes, but it's still too long to just be in one place, especially on a road movie, because that's what these are, is they're just fantastical road movies. You got to keep this thing going. You can't stick in one spot, or else it's just going to start to feel stale and like you haven't done enough in the movie.
You know what this movie reminds me of? And it's the easiest. Oh, this reminds me of another movie. It reminds me of Lord of the Rings.
It's like
right.
It's like
so
the
Lord
not
of the...
to be kind of facetious, but the children's version of Lord of the Rings. Both in maturity and
kind of
requirement.
Yeah, so it's like, because in Lord of the Rings, that those movies are long. They are like long as sin, but they are not boring. Like, there's chunks in the middle where they're just traveling, but there's a purpose, and the set pieces are interesting enough, and characters are fun enough, and you're just going along for the ride and you're digging it. In this, like, I know what those 20 minutes you're talking about are, and it almost feels like you could probably drop a full scene from this movie and trim a little bit off of the back end, and you can get this movie like on a pretty tight like 90 minutes. how long is this movie? This movie's 2 hours. This movie's 2 hours long. You can definitely shave this movie down to being in like the 90-minute range, or at least the like 100-minute range. You can trim some stuff out of this movie. There's a little bit
like,
of fat.
It just left me wondering when they were sitting there with this human that's in a cage. I was like, well, wait, just get him out of the cage and move on. Why are we not doing that? You know? And then they just sat there, and then nothing happened, and then the army passed and nothing happened, and I was like, but I want to know where the army's going now. That's more interesting than sitting here. It's like, it was just odd the way that panned out. And then
like, I get it, because this movie's supposed to be really easy, right? This is supposed to be like just an easy movie.
But you know, it's like,
but it's
supposed to be escapist as well, and it's not really escapist to keep the audience's attention. I'm not saying do anything like, you know, wildly complicated as if this is like The Prestige or something, but where there's 2 Warwick Davises the whole time and the baby was just a decoy or something. I don't know, but
there's 2 Warwick Davises, there's 3 Mad Martikins, you know, there's infinite brownies. We're in infinite time loops.
And it's like, well, it feels like they were infinite brownies, that's for sure.
I did have issues with the brownies, I ain't gonna lie. And one of those brownies was in Usual Suspects, by the way.
I mean, it's actually kind of interesting. I didn't realize that Inigo Montoya was, Gideon from Criminal Minds. Watched through, and I was like, holy shit, I love the guy. No wonder I did.
Right?
But yeah, I guess we're, you know, it does feel a little bit stale that we're harping on about the plot, and maybe it's ironic that we're doing so. One of the other things that I do want to bring up about this movie that I'm fascinated by is, so like, when you write this script, right? Are you writing it, and I do not mean this in any way other than like face value, I'm curious about it. Do you write it with like little people in mind to play the parts?
So that's actually a good point. So I did mention George Lucas wrote this script. He wrote it specifically for Warwick Davis. Specifically with him in mind, because I think Warwick Davis was one of the Ewoks. In Return of the Jedi.
That would make complete sense.
Like, yeah, and I think they met on set, and George Lucas was like, "Oh wow, you're like really nice. You're charismatic. Like, I think there's something in this for you." And this movie kind of sat in a little bit of development hell for a couple of years, and then he finally got it made, and he got it written, you know, produced it, and Ron Howard came out to direct it. Actually, I'm curious, because Warwick Davis is one of those actors where, you know, he was typecasted for a large majority of his career, but then there's a point where you're like, oh wait, he's just been in like everything.
Yeah, he's been all over the place, that's for sure. But
the man's worked consistently since the 1980s. Yeah, actually, he was the main Ewok in Return of the Jedi. He was Wicket, the main
high
Ewok.
praise.
And that is high praise. Also, I think he was only 18 when he did Willow. If my memory serves, so he was probably only like 15 or 6. He was only like 15.
He was super baby-faced in this one. Like his face looks very almost adolescent in my mind, but he's a very charming character in this movie, so I'll give him that.
Yeah, I think it's a thing where I think we should just talk about some of the characters, because you can tell that Willow's the main character, but I'm guessing there were producers who were like, no. Val Kilmer's the main character. Willow's the guy we have to follow. Because Warwick Davis, he exudes he has charm. You know, he's charismatic, he's likable. But then Val Kilmer shows up.
And I don't hate I don't hate Val Kilmer in this movie.
That yawn is very telling about
Well,
your
you
feelings of
exposed
Val
the
Kilmer.
audience. Yeah, it's like I'm trying to find a way to word it. I think it's that he knows the role he's supposed to play, but at the same time, it's Val Kilmer. So the whole time I'm sitting there going, where's an explosion? Where are guns? I'm kind of waiting for this to become a Val Kilmer movie. It doesn't feel like he should be in this movie.
So, I think if this is a Star Wars remake, then Val Kilmer is Han Solo, right?
That's certainly the character that he's trying to play. Is he supposed to be charismatic? He's supposed to be the they have that twist in the middle where he like turns Willow and the baby over to the bad guys, but it doesn't really track because it just kind of comes out of nowhere.
He's supposed to play like the roguish type, you know. He's like, "Oh, I'm a bad guy. I'm a swashbuckler, scoundrel kind of character, but I have the heart of gold." But he doesn't really pull this off. I got a question for you. Is Val Kilmer a good actor? We'll just open with that. Do you think he is a good actor?
I think he certainly earned his place in, the history. Everybody obviously knows Top Gun, and that's that's
a Tom Cruise
fest,
movie.
But still, it's like it's also the 1980s. Of course, it was supposed to be, and Batman Forever and Tombstone are good movies, and he earns his place.
Okay, I'll say he is fantastic in Tombstone. Oh, I will give you that. Tombstone is a masterpiece. But I have always had this feeling that Val Kilmer's one of those actors who just plays Val Kilmer, or in like just degrees of Val Kilmer in every role.
On the podcast. Yeah, I certainly agree with you.
I'm sorry, like, okay, I think it's my problem because I'm a pretentious asshole, and I've watched a bunch of movies, and it's like, oh, we have actors that just kind of morph into their character, and they really get into it, and they're different in like every role.
I think you're totally right about it.
And then it's like
he's not trying. He doesn't disappear into the character. It's very on the surface. We kind of are saying it over and over again, but he's very on the surface, Val Kilmer, and like I could see somebody else disappearing into the character a little bit more. I don't know exactly who in 1988 would have been the perfect casting for this movie.
Just get Harrison Ford.
I think he might be a little bit past this at that point. Yeah,
he'd be way past this.
That,
uber past this. Oh, wait, just get Johnny Depp. Come on.
I could
Cameron
actually
Elsie
see
only
Johnny
came out 4
Depp
years
playing
ago.
this part.
Actually, that was kind of like me just being half joking, but now I'm thinking about it.
I mean, Johnny Depp
would have been really good
the exact opposite, where he could totally disappear into to a character he's playing. And I think, especially for this, like him disappearing into this like charismatic but bumbling, all-star warrior,
kind of half badass, half clown.
Yeah, and I think that's what
character.
I was missing from this, because Kilmer is introduced, or Mad Mardigan, as I'll continue to try and call the character. Mad Mardigan's introduced as like a fool. He's literally sitting inside a bird cage when we meet him, and his whole arc is he's supposed to prove that he is worthy of being one of the great warriors of his time. But I don't know, I was just kind of sitting there going like, I don't really believe anything of this character. Even when he finally got his badass action sequence, I was still sitting there like, yeah, but why haven't you busted that out till now?
It's one of those things where you follow him through a good chunk in the movie, and he's just a jackass. And then when it's time for him to like man up and do something, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. There's no establishment that he's like this drunken master, where he's the whole facade of him being this kind of like bumbling jackass is to underplay his opponent so he can like outdo them in combat.
And it would actually
that would
make
be smart.
A lot more sense for him to be introduced as some sort of, I don't know, like he uses his skill for bad intention, and then he like learns to use his skill for good intention, and then that would be his arc, which would also do the same and show his skill and that he's capable of his skill. But then now it's like, because of the confidence that is instilled in him for having good intention, he's able to actually use and prove himself.
I wonder if it would have worked better if Mad Mardigan was part of like a bandit group or whatever, and they like kidnapped Willow and the kid, and then he realized, oh, you have a baby, and they're just gonna kill Willow and like the baby and just take all their shit. So he like lets them go, and it's them having to like outrun the bandit troop and also save the baby.
Really sad
kind of thing, or is that too hokey?
Really
that might be
sad.
Too hokey.
We're describing Han Solo.
What?
I mean,
it's
the guy who has the power, but he uses it for bad intention, and then his arc ends in using it for good intention, and he's part of a group of bandits. That's Han Solo. That's who the character is.
God damn it. Damn you,
kidding.
George Lucas. I mean, you've ruined
I don't know.
It okay, but like you got to admit, this feels like a Star Wars movie. Just minus the sci-fi stuff.
Instead of meeting the Emperor at the end, Star Wars, you don't even know there's an Emperor until the second movie. But even still, it's like, I think that there's merit to the lesson of the movie, and that Willow is still a good character at its core.
We got to say some good stuff about this movie, or I'll feel bad, because I did pick this because I was like, oh, it's a good escapist fantasy flick. It's a little kid movie, but it's fun.
Don't get me wrong, it's a really good pair for The Princess Bride. Part of me would think to pair it with like a Python film, like Holy Grail, or maybe something else of. This would also. Princess Bride may also go well with Time Bandits or something, but ultimately I think that those films are too far on the nose of parody, or too deep into a specific type of fantasy, that they aren't really well paired, whereas Willow and The Princess Bride are ultimately about the same thing. They're roughly a hero's journey, and then one is just a little bit more smart about crafting its plot, whereas the other is very, I don't want to say basic, but
it's more showy. It's trying to flash, right? Because you can tell the production value of Willow is off the hook. Like there's money behind it. The sets are huge.
And I will
the
say
effects are huge. It's trying to hide the basic plot with
I will say
the
that
spectacle.
the dragon head exploding was pretty cool. It was pretty badass, but. I still, it's one of those things where it's like, great, those are the fireworks, but where's like the storybook ending that I wanted all along? Which, well, now that I say that out loud, I do get a storybook ending that I wanted all along in this movie. It's just that the setup for the entire movie before it is like, well, where did this come from all of a sudden?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Is this one of those like I Know What You Did Last Summer problems where the movie before the last 10 minutes is passable, but the last 10 minutes
I think
is
it's
shit?
the reverse problem, where it's like the first 10 minutes of this movie are good, the last 10 minutes of this movie is good, but it's like the middle hour and 10 is just way different and not connecting the two pieces.
It's a road movie where they lost the roadmap.
I think we kind of had the same problem when, again, not to, for some reason I'm comparing these two movies only because they're a road movie, but because they have zero resemblance otherwise. But when we watched Fanboys, that's what it was called, and that's a road movie that
I remember.
The setup is very specific and interesting. The ending is very specific and interesting,
bittersweet,
but like the middle part of the movie kind of drags at certain points because it doesn't get to the point immediately.
Yeah, it's playing its gags for too long when we're just like, no, get us to the
I feel
to
like
the
there's
next
another
thing,
movie we watched that suffers from a similar problem, but I don't know. I think it's beating a dead. Yeah, it's beating
We
a
watch a
dead
lot of
horse at
movies.
this point. We have watched a lot of. We've watched 40 movies on this podcast before. Is that? It's not that
wow.
many movies, I guess, when you think about it. But because that's one of the things that this podcast has certainly made me realize is there's a lot of movies. But Willow has
lot
certainly
of
been
movies.
one of them, and I think we've kind of
Beating this horse
and
dead. But
yeah, okay.
before we go on, I need just say one thing you think this movie did better
Okay,
than Princess Bride.
I'll be
one thing.
nice.
Anything.
Truthfully,
Just truthfully, we're not gonna pander because I think there's one thing that I can think of off the top of my head that this movie did actually better than
Then-
Princess Bride.
you know what, Dean? I also have one thing, but how about you say your one thing first, so that my one thing doesn't get in the way of your one thing.
You
No,
can't think of anything,
I really
can
just
you? You're
I'm
just waiting
wondering
for
what
me.
your one thing
Yeah, that's
is
what I
because
thought.
I'm sitting here wondering how the fuck you even came up with something.
Okay. I think the production design in Willow is better than Princess Bride for this reason. In Princess Bride, it's very much meant to look like a storybook, old school adventure movie, Robin Hood, and the castle is passable, but you can tell it's like a stage. Everything's supposed to kind of look like it's taking place on a stage, whereas Willow feels like a more fleshed out world.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that. The cinematography in Willow is superior to Princess Bride. Like flat out. I'll say cinematography because some of the location stuff they do in Willow is kind of breathtaking. I mean, there's some very interesting locations where I was like, wow, I wonder where that is in the world. Or when I noticed at the end that the closing shot is of the village of dwarves amongst the hills of China for some reason, which is interesting, but it's a very beautiful film. I'll give it that. And The Princess Bride does. I noticed too that you get much more lost in the story, and then as a result, they can kind of. It's not that I felt like they cut corners in Princess Bride, but it's like I noticed that they didn't even have to do anything over the top for the visuals. Because there are some good visuals in Princess Bride, but it's like none of them are taking the spotlight of the film.
There's no like take your breath away and be like, oh my god, that's gore, and you kind of just get absorbed into the imagery. But I digress because we are about to just gush on a movie for probably
it's
a lot of
what
time.
Everybody's waiting for, Dean. Don't even apologize.
It's what everybody's waiting for. Yeah, but we did get some talk out of Willow, and there is merit to the film. But let's talk about Princess Bride right after this.
Cool.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay. Now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're going to need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, Part 2,
The best part.
The best part, talking about my sister's favorite film of all time, The Princess Bride.
Your sister specifically, nobody else.
Nobody else. I mean, except every woman on the planet.
Well, everybody on the planet.
Right.
This really is like if we can quantify, if you're somehow living in a hole and haven't surfaced for, what is it now? Probably like 30, 40 years.
I think we're about in that almost 40-year category. No, we're in that 33-year category. 33 years this movie has been out.
If for some reason you've been in a hole that entire time, this is one of the greatest movies ever put together. This, from the script to the acting to the whole shebang, is just like perfect execution. And
yeah, accurate.
I don't know. I could start fanboying over it, but let's get into some serious conversation about what makes The Princess Bride one of the greatest films ever.
Right, because I think it's not going to be a surprise that Rob Reiner's really good at his job.
Oh yeah, another return director, by the way.
Oh yeah, returning director Rob Reiner. You used to see him on The American President, but in terms of
you will see him on The American President.
Oh, you will see him on The American President.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
but I'm going to fanboy for a second as a screenwriter.
Please.
This is our first William Goldman film. And William Goldman is a name you're going to hear continuously on this podcast, who is one of the greatest screenwriters to ever live.
I don't actually know what films he's oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So come on, Dean. Look at that list.
Okay, everyone. So I didn't know him as a screenwriter. I thought this was the only movie he ever wrote. And then I looked and Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, Marathon Man, All the President's Men, The Stepford Wives. What? Chaplin. Oh wow.
He can keep going.
Yeah. I actually I can keep going. This guy's got some heat. Misery. He wrote the screenplay to Misery. Oh my.
I'm just saying.
Yeah,
just saying.
Yeah, very, very good screenwriter. Yeah, so you mean to tell me that, okay, so you're a man of a screenwriting class, right? You love your screenwriters, that's your jam, right?
Yeah, that's my bread and butter.
Sorkin or Goldman? Thunderdome rules.
It's kind of like saying what comes first, the chicken or the egg. It's obviously the egg. It has to be William Goldman.
Is that the intellectual in you, or is that the heart in you?
No, it's literally. I believe it was William Goldman that got Sorkin his connection to make
A Few Good Men.
Yeah, A Few Good Men. I was about to say All the President's Men. Similar titles. But yeah, I think it was Goldman that he got in contact with, and then Goldman helped him develop the screenplay and eventually got him hooked up with Rob Reiner.
So are you telling me that William Goldman was the Yoda to Aaron Sorkin's Jedi, or like Luke Skywalker, and trained him in the ways of screenwriting?
Yeah, let me do a loose Google to make sure I have that correctly, but I'm pretty sure I heard that straight from the horse's mouth, from Sorkin. Let's see here.
Because that's amazing, because now that I'm thinking about it, we have William Goldman, who's I've just now learned is one of the greatest screenwriters of all time, and Rob Reiner, who honestly might be one of the best directors of the last 40 years. He was definitely probably the best directors from 1980 to 2000.
Yeah. So the Hollywood or Los Angeles Times quotes this from a article in which Sorkin remembers William Goldman. I'll illustrate it because I think it's a funny little piece.
Please.
He once called me up to apologize. I'm mortified, he said. Why, what happened? I asked, this being Sorkin. Goldman replies. In a story in today's Hollywood Reporter, he replied, the guy says I had a hand in writing A Few Good Men. I called the editor and set him straight. So that's their connection, is that definitively Goldman had helped Sorkin get A Few Good Men off the ground.
Good on him.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of amazing when I think about it, because that just adds to the pedigree of this movie, right?
Yeah, and I think it's that what I'm so fascinated by is Goldman is also he's like has his hands in a lot of pots in the film industry. He's also one of the gurus behind Sid Field and the famous book Screenplay.
Oh yeah.
And in the foreword, he credits Goldman as being, his master that he learned from, while trying to research and learn the craft of screenwriting. And I think it's just that not oftentimes we get to praise screenwriters for the work they do and that they're sometimes the real geniuses behind these things. And The Princess Bride, flat out, Rob Reiner, again, great director, but flat out,
I mean, we did establish, a few episodes ago that Rob Reiner might have been one of the best directors of the last 40 years, because that streak is untouchable.
And that's very true, but I certainly believe that everything to do with why people love this movie ends up finding its way back to the script. And because we could even run down the line basically real quick. The characters, obviously have to come from the script.
Yeah.
The pieces of dialogue in this movie are genius. And this movie is classic as far as teaching you how to not overdo the dialogue and make it an accessory to the film rather than, dialogue becoming the film, like a lot of people tend to think it is. The gags are great, but that comes from the script.
Yeah.
The story itself, the arc of these characters is perfectly paced and woven. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I want to break this script down and study it piece by piece to learn from it. Even though at the end of the day, it's a parody film, so it's there's only so much you can get from it. But
is it a parody film though?
I think it's not necessarily a parody film like the Scary Movie or something.
Not like that.
Kind of like we now know what a parody film is, but it's certainly a parody film in that it uses the classic definition of parody, kind of in the same way that a film like Doctor Strangelove uses parody. That the comedy isn't situational; it's making fun of these themes and characters.
Well, that's the thing, because I don't think The Princess Bride is going for parody, because I think it's a sincere thing, and there's comedy there's comedy in the film. All right, Andre the Giant's funny, and the Miracle Max with Billy Crystal is funny, but I don't know if that's because they're recognizing the tropes of the genre and making fun of them, or if they're just like, these are the tropes of the genre and we just play into it. It's
yeah. I think that's definitely more a classic version of parody. I think for some reason our contemporary views of it have warped the definition so much to the point where it's like, take Scream for example, a film that we've talked about several times, and that's a parody movie in itself.
It's a satire.
And that's how it uses its satire being a form of parody. That's how it uses the tool to subvert the genre, which is exactly what this movie is doing. Is it's using the tool of parody in order to subvert the classic going through the motions fantasy film, i.e., something like Willow.
Yeah.
Because think of even how this movie begins. You don't even open on the story itself. this is all happening just from a grandpa, a schlubby old grandpa reading a story to a sick kid.
Played by Columbo himself, Peter Falk. And
Yeah.
returning actor, by the way.
Yeah,
Returning
that's
actor
true.
from
That
Murder
is
by Death.
true.
And I love Peter Falk. I love Columbo. Like that, he is the master of the schlub.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. And he's talking to Fred Savage, who was every 10-year-old suburban white kid. If you didn't know.
And this is another thing that I really love is that dynamic that the movie operates in, the vehicle for the whole thing. It's like almost it does, and ultimately why I really think it's parody is that they even almost break the fourth wall and poke fun at the way that the audience is getting into this ridiculously set up story. Because think about the first like third of this film. Really, is it some summary of what the two main characters and their kind of not necessarily by the books, but it's very run of the mill love story.
It opens like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Once upon a time in this far off land, there was these two kids and they fell in love and da 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 da.
Yeah, and then the first three opponents per se that we run into after like the summary is done are very cartoonish. We love our Inigo Montoya, we love our Andre the Giant, but
and then was it Vizzini?
Yeah, he's a very
never start a land war in Asia.
He's a very cartoonish opponent, and it's a very classic version of this is kind of a more screenwriter's term, but it's like a false opponent, you could say, where you think that's like the main antagonist of the movie because
they're the ones who stole Buttercup and all that stuff, and then
but it's like this is kind of what I meant and when I mentioned earlier that there's a really good way to start simple and get more complicated, is that the film peels back like this rind of conflict that goes deeper and deeper into the world of the story, because it's almost fascinating how you mentioned this never start a land war in Asia, when that's actually what's going on in the rest of the story. Is they're about to start a land war with false pretenses, and it's like
that's actually something about this movie that completely like I was oblivious to until I watched it this time around, because we didn't go over who's seen this movie and when, but this again, my sister's favorite movie. She's older than me, so I watched this movie basically from birth until now.
It's
but
timeless.
It's timeless, but I haven't seen it in a few years, and I put it on and watched this, and I realized that the crux of this movie, why they're kidnapping Buttercup, is so Prince Humperdinck can like kill her, frame it on his opposing kingdom so he can start a war. And I'm like, isn't that a plot point in Game of Thrones?
Yeah, it's all, but it's also under this guise of like idiocy and buffoonish antics.
Like you kind of miss that because you're kind of wrapped up. It's like, oh, it's kind of like nice, it's this adventure story, oh, swashbucklers. And you're like, oh wait, Prince Humperdinck's like, he's fucking Hitler, dude.
Yeah, and it's like very, I don't know. I'm for some reason missing the word for it, but for some reason it reminds me a lot of like Gilliam-esque, maybe Monty Python style of humor, where it's very tongue-in-cheek. There specifically in this particular scene, I'm talking about the scene where Dread Pirate Roberts and then Inigo Montoya have their sword fight.
You mean one of the greatest swords fights in cinema history?
Exactly, and he's climbing up that wall from the sea below, and they have this cordial conversation while he's climbing up. It's hilarious because it's like you get so caught in feeling like you need to take this conflict seriously, but then it's two gentlemen, talking before they have a very skilled, gentlemanly fight.
Also, it also gives you everything you need to know about Inigo Montoya in that one exchange.
The term for him would be the false opponent ally. Same with Andre the Giant. Yeah. Because that's the other thing I really like is from the get-go they set up how it's noticeable, yet the false opponents that we receive, you can see exactly how his two henchmen have degrees of him, but are also not as flat out corrupt as him, because while one of them seems like a buffoon,
Mm-hmm.
but has the courage, and then the other is kind of has this intellect that, you know, he thinks he has. I guess what I'm trying to say is that he tries to emulate them both, but then, you know, it's very visually obvious that he can't emulate them both, so he has to have them around.
Well, it's the thing where it's like, Andre the Giant Fezzik, what he is, strength, he's brawn and all this other stuff, but he's kind. Where it's, and then you have Inigo, who is this skilled swordsman. He's one of the best killers you can have, but he's honorable. He's a man of honor. And Vizzini, he's incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
But his thing is, it's not like, oh, he's incredibly intelligent and uses for kindness. He's intelligent, but he's also greedy, and he's also like angry, and he's also like cocky.
Yeah, and I think what I think is really the word I was trying to search for is there's vanity in Vizzini that blinds him to his inability to actually be what he thinks he is. Mm-hmm. Because obviously then that's resolved in the whole battle of wits scene, which is hilarious.
It's good.
But it kind of also is a good way to set up then the actual antagonist of the film, like the vain king who thinks he can get away with political corruption and illegal marriage and all these things. It's like another way of doing the ending is in the beginning, because then it's like we already know what will be the downfall of the king at the end of the story is his vanity will get in the way of realizing, his goal is based in fantasy. There's no way he's going to actually be able to get away with everything he's doing, because it's all based on greed and yada yada yada, like Vizzini.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, right? That we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 villains in this movie, right? If you can call like, Inigo and Fezzik villains, right?
Yeah.
Because we have like 5 villains in this movie. And we have our protagonist, Wesley. And each one of them, something about, even though there's so many people in this movie, right? Because this movie's like 90 minutes long. This one's actually, 98 minutes long. And we have 5 villains. We have a romance story. There's a comedy going on here. There's a political intrigue going on here. There's adventure. There's action. And the movie has economically paced it out so we know everything about each one of these characters, how they relate to each other, and we're completely bought into it. I don't know what I was going with that. I just wanted to point out that like, I just realized when you were saying that we have like 5 villains in this movie, and I know everything about them.
Yeah, and everything about them you understand, because that's the point. We're not supposed to... Mystery isn't something that you should base the entire thing on, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a little bit too where Willow
dropped the ball.
Dropped the ball, is that the mystery kind of gets in the way of finding answers. Don't get me wrong, but like, I really was like not realizing what the whole point of what was going on was half the way through Willow. I mean, I kind of had to stop and realize, like, okay, there's a baby. What's the baby doing? It's supposed to save everybody, but it's a baby, so I don't really...
It's like a thing for a prophecy that's like glossed over. It's a MacGuffin. But
yeah, it's weird, because like in every other story, the baby would have just been like in the beginning, and then eventually the baby would have grown up a little bit, and then that's when the prophecy really begins. Mm-hmm. Is once the kid has grown a little older, ergo something maybe like a Harry Potter, where there's the prodigal baby, and then after they're actually able to physically move on their own and not drink milk for sustenance, they're a formidable opponent to whatever the evil is in the story. But it's like with this, you're supposed to understand the characters because that's what story is. It's character. And how are you supposed to understand what your main character is fighting against if it's shrouded in mystery for most of the movie? Then it almost feels like the goal doesn't really make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what? Like, I think I think we just have to talk about the characters like one on one, and just give like a little tidbit because I think each one of these characters is worth talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that'll also kind of point out why this movie is so much different than Willow is.
Yeah.
Because in Willow there's like 5 characters that are on this road movie, and like we only talked about 2 of them in Willow. Right?
Yeah. I mean, really, I think I mentioned 3 actual character names. And one of them, the character like disappears halfway through the movie. I actually don't even know where the character ends up. I don't know where Migosh goes.
That's correct. That actually, yeah, you did. We only mentioned like 3 characters by name. But in this one, we got Wesley, played by Carrie Elwes.
Yep.
And is he just the embodiment of every Errol Flint role put into one?
You know what I really noticed about him in this movie?
Mm-hmm.
He has a knack for just being porcelain still. Like, in some of the shots, it's like I focused on the way that his head and his eyes were just stone cold still, and it was so like, dude, it just like made me sit there, and it exuded confidence. You know what I mean?
Okay, that 100% can get behind, because when this guy looks like down the lens of the camera or whatever, like he's looking into your soul.
Yeah, or it's specifically, I noticed it in the scene where he's the king has come into the room when he's like paralyzed in the bed,
Mm-hmm.
and they're kind of having this exchange where the king is questioning if he has the strength to get up, and then Wesley comes back saying, is it that I don't have the strength to get up, or is that I have the strength to get up and I haven't shown you until now, or something like this.
Yeah.
When he's saying those lines back to the king, yeah, he's paralyzed, but like I noticed that he was just had this like his look, and I could tell, he's looking off camera right into the soul of the king, and he didn't blink, but it wasn't creepy. It was like, this guy means business.
It's one of those things where it's like, if you had that stare, women would fall before you. You can totally see why Buttercup is completely in love with this guy just by that look.
And can we talk about Buttercup for a second?
After you. All
I
right.
mean,
Buttercup,
so this is, I think,
played by
another
Robin
reason.
Wright.
Yeah, this is the famous Robin Wright. This is another reason I think that the movie is a little bit borderlining on the parody, is like Buttercup as the name of the princess.
Yeah,
it's
Princess Bride.
It's stereotypical. It's just like, what would a princess be named? Princess Buttercup. Yeah.
It sounds like something you would make up, and then it's Prince Humperdinck.
Yeah.
It's real close to a dick joke somewhere.
But it's almost like it's textbook screenwriting in a way where it's like the names of your characters should perfectly embody who they are.
Yeah.
Wesley is very charismatic, handsome guy. Buttercup is the naive princess who will become queen of the castle someday. Inigo Montoya is exactly the type of name for a character who needs a revenge plot.
Yes, 110%.
The greatest revenge plot to ever be written, by the way.
I will say this right now. Inigo Montoya is the most influential fictional character in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons to have ever been created.
Oh, I'm sure. He's probably one of the most influential characters to ever been created, period.
Well, I say this because Dungeons and Dragons came out in the 70s, and people were like, dude, what are you talking about? Go and ask any table that has ever ran Dungeons and Dragons, and somebody, I guarantee you, I will bet my house on this, will say, yeah, my backstory was just Inigo Montoya. Somebody killed my father, and I'm on a search to avenge his legacy.
Yeah, because it's, again, super stereotypical what you think it is. It's just that then it's done so well, and specifically with the six-fingered man, that you get caught up in it because it's like, well, I've never heard that before.
Right? Well, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's this guy, and the other thing is like Manny Patinkin. Is that how you pronounce his last
Mandy
name? Patinkin. He also sells that role like a champ.
Yeah, he's perfect for it.
Is there anyone else you can think of as Inigo Montoya?
Well, no, because up to this point, I had zero clue it was Mandy Patinkin. It's like that it's the character disappears into the role exactly like Val Kilmer doesn't.
Dude, could you imagine if Mandy Patinkin was Mad Mardigan in Willow?
He would have blown Willow out of the fucking water. Like, you gotta be kidding me.
You're like, dude, that charm just exuding off him, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, they ought to do like a Princess Bride sequel where Willow is just the story of Inigo Montoya as Dread Pirate Roberts.
Honestly, I would give... Oh, that'd be so good. Because I kind of want to know what happened to Inigo after the whole thing, being Dread Pirate. Good stuff.
Yeah.
And then we also have Fezzik, the definition of a gentle giant, being played by a real-life gentle giant, also being played by one of, if not the most famous people to have ever lived. Probably the most famous pro wrestler ever. It's like him. Because it's like Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, John Cena.
But if you were to ask anybody who... like, what's the wrestler it's either going to be Hulk Hogan, and then immediately afterward, his nemesis, Andre the Giant.
My uncle Danny and my Aunt Kathy were at WrestleMania 3, and they saw the slamming of the Giant. My Uncle Danny has still been hyped for that. It's been like 30 years. He is still hyped over that.
The greatest body slam ever.
Yes. The slamming of the Giant. I can just go up to people and be like, do you know about the slamming of the Giant? And then they'll just look at me dead in the eye and be like, when Hulk Hogan slammed onto the Giant? Hell yeah, dude. I wasn't even born yet, but I popped off. It was great.
That video is actually legitimately impressive. Like, you and I are both fans of pro wrestling, but it's fascinating because it's like nothing like that has ever been done since. And I mean that to say, yeah, there's been big men in wrestling, but nobody as big as Andre the Giant. And nobody as prolific as Hulk Hogan. And nothing as... I'm going to flat out say it. There's been people who've jumped off Hell in the Cell. There's been people who've crashed through things. People have broken their neck. People have died in the ring. Nothing has been as physically impressive as somebody flipping Andre the Giant.
Which is insane. Because it's just a basic body slam.
But you know what?
It's kind of all the
here's
hype.
How I'm tying it back into Princess Bride is that it's all about the story, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about the way you just set it up. Nobody had ever done that to Andre the Giant before that. And then that Hulk Hogan was finally able to perfectly act out just body slamming this over 7 foot tall person.
This mountain of a man.
Yeah. If I can get by the way, because I think this is important to understanding Andre the Giant. If I can get the exact measurements on the size of this man, he is 7 foot 4 inches, 224 centimeters for those internationally, 520 pounds.
520 pounds in shape.
That's a lot of guy.
That's a lot of man. That's a lot of man.
That's bordering on 3 people in one person.
Yeah. Well, dude, that's almost like 2 Americans slapped together. All right. Yeah. But that's the thing, because Andre the Giant is one of those, like, we're gonna talk about Andre the Giant for a minute because I love Andre the Giant. But Andre the Giant's one of those people who are just like, he's like a cultural thing, where it's like there was a point in time where it's just like, oh, it's Andre the Giant. Everybody knew who Andre the Giant was. He was the man. And, we have him in this movie and we're watching him and it's weird because it's like almost Andre the Giant just playing Andre the Giant. This giant human being. He's stronger. He's bigger than everybody else. And he's, playing this kind of fun guy. He's, laughing. He's might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but he's, everybody likes him and he's super charming. And that's the crazy thing is Andre the Giant, that his English is not great,
Well,
but
no, 'cause
goddamn,
he's French as well. I mean,
yeah,
it's not his first language.
yeah.
Which I would love to hear Andre the Giant speaking French.
Could you imagine? Because Andre the Giant, when he's speaking in English, this is kind of how he talks. It's really loud and booming. But if I want to imagine he speaks perfect French, he's like Pepe Le Pew. It's like suave as shit. Like there's no like giant voice. It's like
I want to look
super
this
charming.
up real quick. I want to live see if I could find a clip of him.
I can
French.
guarantee it exists. I can guarantee it exists.
It has to, but I'm gonna see if I could find something.
But yeah, but something
Continue
cool,
speaking about Andre the Giant in the interim.
I will. And that's the thing, in the film he exudes this, he's like stronger, bigger than everybody else, and he's fun, he's caring, and all this other stuff. But behind the scenes fact about Andre the Giant is that his back was shot during the entirety of filming, and it kind of came about later in life because, as we said, when you're 7'4" and you walk around at 500 plus pounds, basically your entire adult life, your joints kind of go. So at the end of the movie, when he has to hold up Robin Wright in his arms, she's on wires because his back couldn't support the weight of another human being lifting him up like that.
And isn't that so sad? I mean, like, to really think about that. He finally got to be, and thankfully he got to be in a movie where it's like it'll go down in history and that nobody will ever forget him because of it. But
it's one of those things where it's like, even if you're not a wrestling fan, you can love Andre the Giant for this movie.
yeah, because I think it's also one of the things that a lot of stars lack nowadays is they lack lovability. Don't get me wrong, everybody loves The Rock, but nobody can really cuddle up to The Rock. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's got all the charisma and the smile, but then it's like, I don't know, maybe Shaq had this too. He had sort of a lovable quality about him that even through things like, Kazam.
Hey, we're gonna watch that on this podcast, all right? Because that was one of those movies my dad used to rent from Blockbusters to make me and my brother shut up.
Am I crazy?
Shazam, I
Okay.
think it was Shazam.
Okay.
Shazam. I think Kazam was the one with Sinbad that's fake, but everybody made it real by wishing it into existence.
Right. I don't know. I just feel like there's a different quality about Andre the Giant that is missing from a lot of people that we see on screen today. I don't know. It is odd. Like, we've watched a lot of movies that are from the past, quote unquote, on the podcast. We really haven't done any contemporary movies because, COVID's going on, but then also it's like we wanted to do some favorites of ours in this first half year of doing
I think
this.
the most recent movie we did was Yes, God, Yes, and Da 5 Bloods. I think those were the two most recents we done.
Yeah, and then next year I'm sure we'll get into some more contemporary things, but it's been fascinating to see certain qualities of these films that are not really present in contemporary films. And I don't know why. I can't put my finger on why certain films nowadays just don't feel the same anymore as other movies did and by the way, movies felt the way that these movies felt for like several decades, from you're going to get the same feeling you get out of a movie like, I don't know, something from 1969, like
You're searching for it. Well, if we're just talking about a movie that's just like makes you feel like good, like it's a sincere good feeling. It's like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, oldest film we've done on the podcast, and at the end you like Jamie Stewart and his performance, all this other stuff. It's that sincerity, and you feel good at the end of the movie. It's the same thing, 40 years later, it's sincere, it's fun, and it makes you feel good at the end. And and we've done movies like that. It's almost like a thing where somewhere in like the 90s in like kind of that early 2000s area, we hit that point of like sincerity didn't work anymore, and irony and parody became the norm. Like you couldn't just make a straight action movie. You had to make like a parody action movie, or an action movie that was conscious that it was a cheesy action movie and like subverted the genre kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't.
Did Scream really ruin everything?
I don't know. Maybe it did.
It ruined slasher movies for like
I think
a decade.
it still existed through the 90s. This feeling I'm talking about that doesn't have a name. And if anybody would like to point me out to a vocabulary word for whatever I'm feeling right now, I need help. Call 1-800. Talk
David.
to a therapist or whatever the hell. But like, I don't know. It's like I can't think of a movie that would do the same thing, because nowadays like fantasy movies have to get dark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the last fantasy movie that I can think of that was commercially popular was like the Harry Potter spin-off,
Fantastic Beasts.
Fantastic Beasts.
But let's be honest, that movie only made money because it was a Harry Potter thing, right?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I liked that movie because it had certain qualities to it, like the lovability factor. The characters in that movie are very lovable, and I liked them, and I liked the story in that movie. It's that then certain things like Johnny Depp was in it at the height of the whole Amber Heard, conspiracy / problem, whatever people want to chalk that up to now.
Did you hear about what happened with that? Because I guess
he
so
lost his defamation case.
No, well, they fired him off the thing, and then it came out that it's like, oh no, she was like lying about it the whole time, and then everybody's like super mad at Warner Brothers, and they wanted to hire Johnny Depp back.
Yeah,
I don't really know the details about that because I just saw it on a Reddit post. So.
Yeah, the most recent things I've seen is that he lost his defamation case, and that there was apparently increasing public-facing perception that Amber Heard was lying about it the entire time. I don't know exactly because I don't know the details of the whole thing, and I'm not really going to comment on either way.
Yeah.
I just know then the other thing I saw is that he ended up leaving Fantastic Beasts. It wasn't that he was fired. That was at least what I've seen recently.
I don't know, because like half the time I see stuff on like IMDb and it says one thing, Reddit says another thing. My brother sees something on 4chan, it's another thing. I don't know. The internet's weird, and news is all relative.
Yeah, and all of this is a moot point to what really I'm trying to get at here, and is that Princess Bride, for some reason, has this quality about it where the set design isn't over the top, right?
It's almost storybook in a lot of ways.
The acting and writing are textbook, but just genius enough to hook you in. The directing is not over the top, and it is in many ways probably very noticeable, but in the right way.
I almost think the directing is almost like incredibly subtle. Like you almost forget that the editing and the camera moves in ways, and you're just so like engulfed in the character. Like the directing is incredibly subtle. Same with the cutting and the
maybe
editing.
So like I don't know. There's just I'm going to chalk it up to there's an unknowable quality about this film that for some reason we've lost, and I really want directors and writers and actors to find it again, because movies nowadays just for some reason have a much different no pun intended, but film over them, where they're a little bit too realistic at times. They are a little bit too, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, and maybe I should just...
You know what it is? Technology got too good. CGI made it so directors then have to work.
Maybe, because that was actually something I was thinking about. I was watching this is kind of a tangent, but I was watching this video essay on Kurosawa's cinematography earlier. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's the most film student thing I've ever said. And
it's pretty hardcore, yeah.
I was noticing in a lot of the shots that like the practical effects were really emphasized, and that almost makes it more pronounced in the building of his images, because he's a very image-based director where he wants all of his cinematography to be composed rather than kind of more naturalistic and flowing, which is kind of like I think that's another thing I can point out is that cinematography nowadays, barring maybe like a Wes Anderson or somebody like him who has a little bit more style, or an Edgar Wright maybe, the cinematography
where
is
they have a shtick.
Yeah, it's a little bit too naturalistic to where the image isn't as noticeable, you know? Because I often think about this. This is actually a good example of what I mean, because it perfectly tracks a director who existed during this time and then also exists in contemporary film. Martin Scorsese, right? He's a guy who always emphasizes the importance of the image, especially Kurosawa. I mean, that's somebody who he gets a lot of influence from. And, you know, in his previous films, yeah, you could definitely notice the image plays an important role in supplementing the story. Most famously, we could think about movies maybe like on the nose, Goodfellas, and the whole trunk bit. But then there's movies like Wolf of Wall Street, in which he tries to point out in this video I watched, I think it was from the behind the scenes, that the ending shot of the film, you know, pans out from the whole Jake, I think is the main character of the film, right? Pans out from getting this guy to try and sell him the pen at the seminar, and the camera pans over the audience, them staring back at him. And he points out that there's this whole there's a religion to what's going on there, and yada yada yada, and it just kind of gets lost on me because I'm sitting there going, yeah, but really what you're doing is craning the camera over the audience, which I feel like is kind of a contemporary way to shoot that, because the camera can go more places now, whereas in a previous, maybe a little bit more non-contemporary film, the camera might have to been static or out more, so the shot would be a little bit more large and noticeable.
It's one of those things where it's like, because it's almost one of those things where we have more value. Like, I think it's the thing where it's pretentious, you know, film people such as myself,
Yeah.
is that we put more weight in older films and their camera work than we do in newer films and their camera, or we put in newer films in general, because we for those who don't know, film school brats here, in like film school and film education, you watch old movies. You don't really watch contemporary films unless it's like very specific for that class, or even for that like topic of conversation. Usually you're watching films from like the 60s.
Yeah, that's true.
70s is like the oldest most things go. And there's a huge emphasis on like, well, what does the camera mean? What does this do? Why is this important? Why is that important? And a lot of times it's so like a lot of times in older films it works because it was so like revolutionary at the time, but when you watch it with modern eyes, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because we've seen it perfected over the 40 years since this happened. And I think that's kind of the thing with The Princess Bride, to round it back because I'm good at this game.
Yeah.
It's Princess Bride is almost that perfect point where it's like, it's the development of like film, where it's like we've seen some of the greatest adventure films, the fantasy films, the family films up to this point, because this movie came out in 87. So we had already had, you know, Adventures of Robin Hood. We've already had name some fantasy movies for me, because I'm drawing a blank because I'm bad. Wizard of Oz. We've seen the Wizard of Oz and all these other things.
Yeah.
But we haven't gotten to the point where it's like technology has started overreaching. We haven't gotten to, you know, Jurassic Park, where it's like, oh, CGI can do no wrong. We haven't gotten to like, you know, that stuff where it's like, oh, computers are really starting to get in and we can kind of start fiddling with the image a little bit more, or cameras aren't, you know, that cameras can, you know, do different things and all these other things. We haven't gotten to like DSLR. We haven't gotten to digital age yet. Like that doesn't come into effect for another like couple years after this movie. Like a year after this, when Willow came out, that's when ILM was like, oh, we can do all these things with computers and insert all these stop motion stuff into scenes, and we can make people look big, small, whatever. And I think that's the thing with Princess Bride. It's almost that perfect point between old school sensibility and sincerity versus like new school like technology and kind of like I'm trying to find another thing because it's like that's how I feel about this movie. Like everything after this movie and before this movie. And it might not be this movie in general, but this like era of film.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Am I crazy or am I rambling or I'm onto something here?
No, I agree. And I don't know why we can't come to like some sort of definition for what we're trying to talk about here. And I'm sure there's a listener out there presently or otherwise who's screaming into their earbuds calling us assholes and idiots for not
there's probably somebody out there who's like, guys, you've been on this for like 20 minutes. I get the point.
Yeah.
Sorry to that person.
There's something uncanny about the whimsy that this film has, despite the fact that all it really is a castle, some swamp sets. I mean, literally, the sword fight between Inigo Montoya and Wesley takes place on a set. It's very noticeable.
It almost like this could have been a stage play.
Yeah, and
right?
Goldman, I think, does have some experience in that. But it's so simple in its production that it's almost a little bit more. I don't know. We've had this conversation too, where it's like practical effects are always more believable. I'm flat out. It's like because it's there, and
your brain's not telling you it's bullshit every couple of seconds. It's just like, no, that's a real guy. That's real.
Yeah.
It just looks weird.
I don't know. I just maybe we should move on from this. Let's
let's talk about
Where do we even go from here?
Well, we were talking about the characters and we got on Andre the Giant for like an hour.
Yeah.
So, but we also have Chris Sarandon as Prince Humperdinck, the greatest villain in cinema, who I've actually met before. I actually, So, he was the voice of Jack Skellington in Nightmare Before Christmas. For those who didn't know, yes, he was. And my girlfriend is a huge fan of Nightmare Before Christmas, so me and her went to a signing he was at because he was going to sign all the Nightmare Before Christmas merch. And I was there, and I was like, I was there, and I realized, oh wait, he was Prince Humperdinck, and I was like, haha, I'm gonna do something here, and I went and bought a copy of The Princess Bride, or I might have stolen my sister's copy, and I had him sign it to my sister because it's her favorite movie, and that was her Christmas gift that year.
Yeah.
One Christmas like a champ, everyone. That's how you do it.
Very good.
Very good. But yeah. So he did, but I met him and he was like super cool. But in this movie, he's a bastard. But in real life, super cool. Yeah,
it's almost as if people aren't who they are on film.
Who knew?
Who would know?
Never would have crossed my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Prince Humperdinck. What makes him a bad guy? Is it the vanity? Is it the killing of his wife?
Yeah, it's kind of the thing we talked about before, where the character is based in something very basic, such as vanity, because that's what character is. Me having read all my screenplay books, that's all character is it's a very basic moral standing that you then visualize through their wardrobe, their action, etc. And this king, who's very put together, his hair is very handsome, everything about him is regal, but his action is like dissonant from who he really is trying to be. He has all these like underhanded political plots ready to go. He's gonna technically commit what would you call that?
You're trying to think of a fancy word for knocking off your bride, right?
Yeah, there's a word for it, I know, but he's gonna create a conspiracy for killing his wife in order to trigger this whole political war, which is super dark when you really think about it. But
yeah. Or the fact that his second in command, Count Rugen, played by Christopher Guest, is like an actual sadist. Like he gets off on like torturing people. He has a torture palace.
And there's like this weird kind of, maybe this is just me and noticing it this time around, I could totally be wrong, but there's some weird homoerotic thing going on between them. where it almost seems like they're a little bit into each other. They're a little bit like there's a line in the movie where he says, "You know, I enjoy watching you work," and it's just like that for me was like,
You're just like,
Hmm.
subtleties going on here.
I think there's a reason you don't want to actually marry Princess Buttercup.
Ugh.
I don't know. But yeah, I think that then extending just the basic, idea of vanity into all of his action and his character.
Mhm. Like,
That's
he
all you
even
have
has
to
to
do.
look good getting on a horse. Like, when
Yeah.
he hops on his horse, he hops onto it like, like he's on a, like, I know he is on a movie set, but it's even like more like
Well, it's
over the
that
top, I guess.
idea of vanity isn't just like you want to look good, but it's that you calculate why you look good at every moment for the purpose of using it to your advantage, and then that's like everything about what he does in the film. Everything that he does is a calculation so that he can ultimately get what he wants, which is kind of the opposite. Vanity really is the opposite of what any main character needs to be, unless this is of course something like a tragedy or an anti-hero story or some weird postmodern bullshit that we get a lot of nowadays. Though I guess I shouldn't say that, because Joker's an anti-hero film, and that character is probably the least vain character to ever live. Go figure. But yeah, again, it's just the perfect combination of. Also, the other thing that I really like about all these characters is all of their specific choices that they end up having are still pretty simple. It's just that a six-fingered man killed my father. It's just that I want to do everything as she wishes. It's just that I fell in love with a man because he went off and was killed by the Dread Pirate Roberts, and he fell head over heels for me. It's just that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just that he wants to start this political war, and he's going to take a beautiful wife to kill as a conspiracy. There's no extra layer of complicated bullshit that needs
Which
to
is
be
kind of
given
interesting,
away.
right? Because you just went over every character's motivation in this movie, and it really is that surface level.
Yeah, because think about too, if we want to compare them again, Willow is the only character in that movie that I think has that simple of a motivation. He wants to become the greatest wizard of his generation and rise from being a common street magician. That's it. That's all his character is. But Val Kilmer, it's like, well, I don't even know if you can even define what he wants. It's that he's in prison, and then
He wants freedom.
He wants
Then
freedom
He wants
in
glory.
the form of taking this baby, and then the baby he ends up liking, but then he also ends up liking the villain's daughter. Then that also makes him want to fight for the baby, which then it's like it goes around in this circle that has too many stops on the way.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because each character has their own little motivation, and like Wesley's motivation is the whole movie. That's what the whole movie's about, right?
Yeah.
He wants to get Buttercup and take her away, and they want to live happily ever after. And he kind of meets all these strange casts and characters, gets what he thinks he gets what he wants, and then it's like, oh, he gets trapped by Prince Humperdinck, and he goes to the torture room, and we have that whole thing, and then Inigo Montoya and Fezzik, they manage to save him, and it's the whole Miracle Max thing, and it's really interesting because the story is super simple.
Yeah.
It's super basic, and it just works. God damn it, Bethesda, it just works.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of feel like that's even getting back into the circle of why we initially started talking about this movie. And maybe that's a signal and a sign that we need to move into the comparison of these movies in earnest.
Before we do, there's one thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
You killed my father. Prepare to die. Is Inigo Montoya fighting Count Rugen at the end. Is that one of the best character payoffs ever? Is that one of the best sword fights ever? Is that one of the best like fuck yeah moments in cinema history?
It's certainly not one of my favorite lines from this week. I wrote down one.
Wait. There's a line in this movie better than "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father."
I think there's a line in Willow that certainly caught my eye more, because I'm pretty sure I heard a character say that they were going to start the Second Reich in Willow. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong, but
if people, I know people can't see me, but my eyes just got real wide.
Yeah,
I'm about to look at Willow a whole lot different.
Listen, it could also be because I wasn't paying attention to this fucking boring ass second act of that movie, but that's really mean. I shouldn't say it that harshly, but I swear I heard the Queen of Baraka, or whatever the hell her name is,
Baraka Pool,
or what's her name? It's like.
It really sucks because I was the one who lobbied for Willow, and I'm the one who can't remember dick about it.
Yeah. But she says something to the effect of, "We must start the second," and then I'm pretty sure the word I heard next was Reich. I could be totally wrong, but it sounded a lot like it.
That would color this movie a lot differently in my memory.
Yeah. But... yeah, no, Inigo Montoya, it's kind of funny because, like, there are several pieces of dialogue in this movie that you can use dialogue as symbol, and it's actually recommended as one of, like, it's a really good screenwriting tool to use. And that's one that is super on the nose, but the emotional impact of that line, it like makes the dialogue transcend being dialogue.
The best part about that whole fight scene, when he's like, "Offer me anything, offer me the world, riches beyond my wildest imagination." He's like, "Yours and everything you want, even more." He's like, "Offer me anything my heart desires." And he says, "Anything you want."
Actually, yeah.
I want my father back, you son of a bitch," and stabs.
That's the best line in the movie.
So good.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's almost weird because you want to follow Inigo Montoya, right? He is the Han Solo of this movie. You just want to follow him. But
or
then
like,
Wesley is also like a really interesting character.
The movie has been fairly G-rated to this point, so it's like when that line is said, there's just some stank on it.
Again, Mandy Patinkin, your country needs you. Just so good.
Yeah, he needs.
So good.
He really does need to. He's been TikTok famous as of late, and I've been really enjoying it. But he needs to be in more TV and film, because
we just need more Inigo Montoya.
Yeah,
that's all we want.
Well, because his era of Criminal Minds was also my favorite. My girlfriend loves that show, and his seasons were the most enjoyable because he is such a good actor. And the emotion in of that character is it's breathtaking.
I have never got I can't say I've never been into Criminal Minds because that's one of those shows that's on 24/7.
Yeah.
So you just end up watching it if you're flipping through the channels. But like, I don't know. I now knowing that he was in Criminal Minds for a lot more of it than I thought he was, I might go back and watch it.
There's an episode that I recommend if you want to get into the show, because it's a procedural. You don't have to like start at a specific episode.
Oh yeah.
There's an overarching story to the show, but like it's still fairly procedural in the way it operates. And there's an episode earlier in the run of the show where because he kind of is the main character for a lot of those earlier seasons, he like there's a killer where they have to go like prove that she didn't kill her son or something like this before she's put to death. And it turns out that she's like taking the fall for her son so that he can live a better life. It's one of the most heartbreaking pieces of television I've ever watched. And he is at the centerpiece of why that is one of the greatest pieces of television I've ever watched. So I recommend, I can't remember what the name of this episode is or what season it's from or whatever, but go find it. Anybody who's listening, watch that if you're not into Criminal Minds. If you are, you know what I'm talking about, and you know what I mean when I say it. It's the best.
Yeah. But yeah, and honestly, we can't just gush about Mandy Patinkin because also Carrie Elwes, who is super funny in this movie, and we also find out that him with Mel Brooks makes the funniest Robin Hood in cinema history.
Yeah.
And then he's also in Saw. And it's like, oh man, range, right? But yeah, like honestly, I don't think there's a bad performance in the whole movie.
No, nobody at all. Everybody takes their character to exactly the place where it should go.
Yeah. And before we do the comparison to tug at your heartstrings, the thing that Andre the Giant loved about making this movie more than anything else was that no one stared at him on set. He felt like a normal person on set because no one stared at and gawked at him. Tugging at your heartstrings, there you go.
Well, if you didn't already have a reason to cry.
There you go. The Gentle Giant. Now we're going in to compare these two movies. Now tell me, why is Willow just superior? Why is Willow just the best movie ever made? Why is Princess Bride trash? What's going on here? If we're comparing these two.
Well, and that's the double feature for the week.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen.
No, it's not. It's absolutely the Princess Bride, up and down. And throughout the episode, that's been kind of the theme of our conversation. I feel like there's not much more we could say about why Princess Bride is better than Willow. I mean, really, I think it's just I think overarching, the thing I would like to fully point out in all of this is we talked about it a bit when we watched Time Bandits, but The Princess Bride is also one of those movies that, like, I feel like a younger generation of children needs to watch in order to keep the tradition going and, like, show them what fantasy can really be, not Trolls World Tour.
You got a lot of hate for the Trolls. But
you don't? Look at that thing, dude.
I've never seen them, but yeah, I know the
from the people who brought you Emoji Movie. Jesus.
Yeah. But like that's the thing. It goes back to the Gilliam episode where it's like they just don't make movies like this anymore. And Willow, beyond all of its faults, I still think it's an enjoyable movie, but you can tell it airs really young. Like sub 10 maybe,
yeah, but
maybe a little bit younger,
but it's like it has that really weird balance that a lot of from like this year until like maybe up until 2000, maybe a little afterward, children's entertainment found this really good balance of being smart enough for the parents but also being like childish enough for the kids.
Yeah,
and I think that's the balance it strikes, is like it could be for a children's audience because that's technically who it's being told to, but it's also just smart enough so that audiences of any age can really get into this movie.
And that's also the Princess Bride, because I think the Princess Bride is the textbook of that kind of movie where it's just fun enough for the kids. It's just, goofy enough for the kids to go on with it. But it's just heartfelt enough and just smart enough for the adults. Yes.
I'm not going to lie right now. I was so caught up in our conversation about Princess Bride. I thought that was the film we were talking about. Willow is definitely not smart enough for adults.
Yeah, okay. I was like, I'm just gonna roll with this because I'm pretty sure you think we're still talking about Princess Bride. I was talking about Willow, but yeah. But like,
for a second, I was actually trying to confirm that Trolls World Tour was made by the same people as Emoji Movie, but that's not an important piece of trivia for this conversation. So,
but like, if I'm being honest, like Willow's for kids. Willow is for like sub 10-year-old kids, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely for a children's audience, and that they tried to get the it's a Disney movie, so they tried to get the family into it. But not really working.
Yeah, like it does. Like if you had like little kids, you can put on Willow and they're gonna be entertained.
Yeah,
but
Willow could be an animated movie. That's how it would.
I think that's probably it would be better if it was an animated movie.
It would make more sense.
Yeah. Right. I think that's the thing. Like, if you're gonna Willow's one of those movies where it's like you're gonna watch it as a little kid and you'll remember it a little bit, but once you hit like 13, like the moment you hit 13, you will never watch Willow again unless you need to put something on for another tiny human being.
Yeah.
Whereas The Princess Bride, you could like, honestly, I think that movie just like, it's a fine wine. Princess Bride gets better with age.
I agree.
Because it's one of those things where it's like, as a kid, you're just like, oh, you know, cool adventure story. Then as you get a little bit older, oh, it's a cool, like, oh, it's a love story. Then you get a little older, oh, it's, you know, the story of this grandfather trying to connect with his son through, like, stories. And it, like, it ages up.
Yeah.
And it's really smart and good. Yeah.
And then maybe this is another reason, too, why I'm fascinated by Goldman, is it just is such a perfectly crafted piece of writing in that way of serving the audience, that it really makes me want to understand the process of whittling away each layer of that story. Like, you start, obviously, probably with the kid's story, but then you add the pieces for the older audience, and then you add the pieces for, or it's probably there from the get-go because it's in the mode of the story, but you add the pieces for the quite old audience that you're going for. Like, I just would love to know, I want to witness one of these screenwriters going through the drafts of these stories in which they find each piece that makes this movie what it is.
So, before the pandemic, there was a class. I think it was taught at like USC or something like that. It was one of those big film schools. And the whole semester was just talking about and breaking down how Citizen Kane was written and like made. Basically, it went from initial concept, went through the entire production, the writing process, filming, location, distribution, the entirety of Citizen Kane. Because it's been considered the greatest film of all time for so long.
Yeah.
You know. Would you pay for a class like that, except it's The Princess Bride?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I think that would just work out a lot better. I think you get more bites on that one.
Yeah, I think this is getting quite specific for the conversation, but I really feel like that could exist in that like special screenwriting program at UCLA, and then it would be like a really good tool for a lot of writers to get into, to take with them into the contemporary market.
It'd be a thing where it's like, if you were a screenwriting teacher, you would talk about Chinatown, the conventional perfect script, and you'd like what are like the three scripts if you were a screenwriting teacher? Princess Bride is probably on that list. I'd put Chinatown on that list of best screenplays. What's the third one? You'd be like, if you're studying scripts, this is what you're studying. Is it like Some Like It Hot just because Billy Wilder? Because he's great?
Let me think about this for a moment, because this is a good question.
I know we're getting on some weird tangents here, but I think it just exemplifies that the script is solid.
One script I think is fairly textbook. Maybe not perfect because it's not a very well-known film, but I think, and certainly because it's pointed out in screenplay, so I think it has some merit to being a recognized script. Collateral.
Yes.
I
remember
that's like
that
the
movie.
Perfect action movie script.
It's just so like by the book,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Another film though that I think is worth studying, as far as like unconventional narrative goes, is, and of course as soon as I mention it I forget the name.
You know how this works. Just tell me what it's about, and I'll probably know the movie.
It's you know, the Japanese movie where it's the trial and
Rashomon.
I was about to say
Kurosawa.
Russian, and I'm like, that's super racist if you try and even say the Japanese word that you know it isn't.
I'm over here being like, bruh, Japanese trial Rashomon. Got it.
Yeah,
Nailed
Rashomon.
it.
That's a story that I think people would need to study in this type of class.
But yeah.
And after that, one more.
One
then
more?
It would be it. Double Indemnity.
Oh, Double Indemnity, so good.
Yeah.
I think that's a Billy Wilder script too. I think. I might be wrong. I'm not 100%.
Might be wrong. I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
any wiser than you are, so.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Princess Bride deserves to be like studied in a classroom for its story, how it constructs it, how it sets up and pays off its characters. Willow should be watched by like 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
Is that the comparison we're ending up here?
I think so. And you know what? Willow, here's how I will recommend the films finally. Willow is a good warm-up film to The Princess Bride. That's how I watched these, is I watched Willow first, and then Princess Bride was the fantastic main course. But Willow is a nice bite to eat if you really just want something to whisk you off your feet for a few hours.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Willow's a good like warm-up to the rest of the fantasy stuff you're going to get into.
Yeah, because it's by the book. It's simple. It's not complicated. There's all the beats that you wanted to hit.
There's a lot of set pieces going on. There's a lot of like interesting production going on.
Just interesting enough. You know, it's all there. It's on Disney Plus. You have it.
Yeah, they're both on Disney Plus. That's how I watched them.
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. We are not sponsored yet.
No, I was gonna say. You actually have Disney Plus.
Yes, I did not
Dean,
steal this
watching
movie.
a movie legally? What?
It's not. No, I ain't paying for Disney Plus. Are you high? My girlfriend is. I have her log in.
Okay.
But yeah, like for those who don't know, I am a degenerate. All right, if I'd have to look for my DVD copy of some of these films for more than 30 seconds, I'm going to some Russian websites.
Yeah.
We're looking for some cheap gains here.
That's fair.
But if you would like Dean to buy more movies, visit our sponsor.
Yeah, and I guess that's.
I mean, I think we could gush about Princess Bride for another half hour, but I don't know if
It'd be all the same.
there's more there. It'd be all the same. We would just keep going over. It's like, oh man, the characters are so good. The story is good.
Yeah, it'd be doing no more justice than just telling you, go watch The Princess Bride. It's the perfect movie to watch right now to take you out of the world, what it is at the current moment.
You will feel good after watching Princess
Bride. You're going
Bride.
to feel fantastic after Princess Bride.
So, David, I think that brings us to the end here at the double feature.
It does. And it brings us to the final week of our kind of politics month, quote unquote.
Well, you would think, but we got one more.
Yeah, we do have one more that is going to be a lot more fun than the first 2 weeks of this month. And it's kind of continuing on this fantastic journey that is graced us this week. It's a little bit more based in reality, but is still
a hair more based in reality.
Yeah, especially for one of these films, just a hair. We're going to be doing the one thing that all Americans can probably agree on right now and say, let's give a big middle finger to all the communist, fascist dictators of the world. We're going to be watching The Death of Stalin and The Interview this coming week.
Yes,
I'm pretty excited for this.
This is going to make you feel really good, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But, David, other than that, where can people watch more of our stuff? What else are we doing? What else is going on?
Well, what are we doing? We are on YouTube at In the Frame. We should have some at the point of this release. We should have finally released some of these videos.
The video essays we've been talking about for 10 episodes.
That we've been stringing you along for months are finally becoming a thing, and we're going to have more on the way. This is a new thing for Dean and I, and it's been a lot of feeling things out, but even at the moment of this recording, not having finished it, I'm very proud of the work we're putting into it, and hopefully you enjoy it. You can also find us wherever podcasts can be found, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, and others, including will be able to find in the links of this episode our Anchor link, which should be able to take you to any one of those podcast websites if you aren't just on Spotify like the rest of humanity. Dean, where can they find us on Instagram?
If you wanted to find us on Instagram and follow all our lovely social media, you can follow us on the _feature podcast.
There you can
all that's on Instagram.
Oh.
So yeah. Oh, sorry. Keep going. I'll stop talking now.
Okay. Now I feel bad.
It's fine, dude. I ramble so much. You just cut me off. It's fine.
Well, there you can keep up with everything that we're doing. Dean's lovely girlfriend is running that for us. And we thank her for that again. And until next week, is there anything else, Dean?
Other than that, you should probably check out our other podcasts, which are
Yes,
Too Obscure for TV and yes. Oh, and I also do another podcast
Yes.
called the Film Club Podcast with my lovely girlfriend we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Go watch that one. They're fun.
Film Club Podcast. Check it out. And check out Too Obscure for TV. We should have had a second episode come out sometime soon. So
Yes.
look out for that. It's very enjoyable. We have a guest, our first guest on that one, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas.
Mhm.
But now I think that is truly it for this week
Okay.
on the double feature.
That's it at the double feature today. We'll hope to see you next week for The Death of Stalin and The Interview. David, peace.
The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.